Hello and welcome to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm joined by Chuck Rogers. For the next hour, we're going to talk national politics and mostly the campaign, which is underway. The conventions are over. The nominations are official. I think the last real primary happened yesterday. So we know who the candidates are for Senate, and for the president, and we're rolling, and the campaign is already happening. Where would you like to start, Chuck?
Well, you just mentioned that last primary. Yeah, it was in Massachusetts, a Democratic Senate primary, U.S. Senate. Joe Kennedy III against the incumbent Ed Markey. And at the beginning, when Kennedy announced that he was going to challenge Markey in the primary, it was assumed that that might be the end of Markey because it's a Kennedy in Massachusetts. Yet,
Right.
interestingly enough, and I don't know what we'll learn from this nationally, but interestingly enough, Ed Markey, who is in his 70s, I think, won because he consolidated the young vote and the progressive wing of the Democrats in Massachusetts, which you would think would have gone to Joe Kennedy III, but didn't. And so Joe Kennedy III is out and done. I predict he'll be back at some point. I don't know in politics or in something else, but it's not the end of his career, but it was a surprise. So Ed Markey moves on to the general election.
I Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess we have a new generation of voters in
Yeah,
Massachusetts that aren't quite caught up in the dynasty that the
right.
Kennedys were, both in terms of politics and culture. Because it is the first loss of a Kennedy running for office within Massachusetts,
Right.
uh, and
Yeah, and it may be that the Kennedy mystique is now a little too distant to have as much cachet as it used to have. Although Joe Kennedy III was a well-respected legislator in the U.S. House. I mean, he was well regarded and very bright, and seemingly had been doing a good job. I think he jumped into this Senate race because he was looking down the road at when his opportunities might come up and thought that this might be the only opportunity for another 6 to 12 years. So I think that's why he primaried Markey. I don't think he has anything really against Ed Markey. I think he was looking at his own timetable here and thought that this was his chance to move into the Senate.
now, an interesting thing about the party politics is that Kennedy was endorsed by centrists, of the party, or it or the more mainstream of the party, including Nancy Pelosi, while or Ocasio-Cortez and, as you pointed out, Elizabeth Warren were backing Markey as the basically the more progressive of the two. And we can go into the positions, has to do with healthcare, has to do with a lot of things like that. But the interesting thing about that is, there's been a series of progressive challenges in primaries over the
Mhm.
past few years. Ocasio Cortez being one of them, but there being another, and I think the DNC choices have held on and managed to win, but it's obviously not a done deal. And there was a policy that came out, I think, after, maybe before or after 2018, that if any Democrat was to endorse a challenger to an incumbent, they would be denied DNC funding. And yet, the DNC, the central leaders, broke that very rule, and endorsed Kennedy, uh, because they want more centrist people for whatever reason. Maybe they feel it's easier to win national elections if it's more moderate. But whatever happened, there may have been a little backlash against that in Massachusetts. I think.
Yeah,
They be,
the thing I've been struggling with since the results were announced last night and all day today, it's kind of been in the back of my mind, and that is whether this Kennedy Markey race is instructive for the Biden campaign or not. I mean, what we know, and the thing that keeps me from saying that there is a lot to learn from it, has to do with the makeup of the state of Massachusetts to start with. Heavily Democratic, progressive in the Boston area, not so much in Western Massachusetts.
Right.
So, and as you say, AOC and Elizabeth Warren endorsed the person who ultimately won. That may have more to do with the makeup of the Boston area than it does the rest of the country. So I'm not sure that the Biden campaign is going to take a whole lot from this, but we'll see. I mean, we don't know. I'm sure that somewhere in the Biden universe, there are people poring over the statistics of that as they keep coming in. So I don't know if it means that we'll see Biden move a little bit more to the left, or if he'll move a little bit more and kind of stay center left. I don't know.
Or
I'm
he
just
could
sure there's a lot that we can take from this one nationally.
simply offer policies that both like. I mean,
Yeah.
that's that's what politicians do. But you're right. Massachusetts is one of the more progressive states
Yeah.
out there. In fact, it was the only state that McGovern took against
Right.
Nixon in 1972, which led to the bumper sticker, Watergate era bumper sticker. Don't blame me. I'm from Massachusetts.
Right.
It is liberal there. I think the last time it went to a Republican was Reagan in 1984.
Yeah.
And that's a very rare thing. It happens. They do elect centrist Republicans as governor. They've got one right
They do.
now. They elected Romney,
Yeah.
back when he was pro-choice, and a lot of.
But what did Romney do in Massachusetts? He came up with the prototype for what became Obamacare. So there's that as well. Romney, a Republican, even had to bend a little bit because of the state he was governing.
Yeah, he did. And I remember the first time he tried to run against Ted Kennedy. And I remember
Uh,
Kennedy in a
yeah.
debate that was during the Republican Revolution of 1994, and all the incumbents were in trouble. And I just remember watching a debate where Ted Kennedy just clobbered
Right.
Romney. Romney didn't know what hit him. He's like saying, I forget what he was criticizing. He was criticizing something that Kennedy supported, and Romney had a counter proposal, and Kennedy started to tear into that proposal, and Romney says, "Well, we can debate the details," and Kennedy says, "Well, that's what you have to do when you're in office. The details are important," and Romney was completely flustered. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off on that, but Massachusetts is a unique place. They have memories of, who knows, maybe Ted Kennedy would have been president, but for Chappaquiddick, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
always been the claim. But yeah, it definitely, at least for the moment, the dynasty is done. And it may very well be that Massachusetts, particularly the Boston area, but also some of the college towns, are in the mood for a more progressive approach to things. And how does Biden handle that? Well, it'll probably have more to do with what happens after the election if he wins than the way he campaigns.
Well,
Um,
one last thing on that. You mentioned college towns, and in some of the reading I was doing late last night, because I was up working late last night, and decided before I went to sleep to just read more about it. It is true that Markey took Boston, as you might expect, because that's where most of the progressives are, obviously in that state. But they did single out college towns, a lot of which are out in Western Massachusetts, which is less progressive, but specifically the college towns out there did go for Markey. So
yeah.
it could be that he did well enough in all of those college towns in Western Massachusetts to maybe offset just enough out there. And who knows? And maybe that's instructive for Biden. I don't know. We'll see. We'll
I
see.
don't know, but I believe that's the last primary. I think everybody is selected now. That's kind of a late primary, to tell you the truth. But anyway, so we're well into that race. And of course, there's no doubt that Marquis is going to beat the Republican, bar some
Yeah.
real cataclysmic event. But the Senate races are happening. I think you just mentioned before the show that that South Carolina is kind of tied. And I noticed that the good senator down there was ranting against QAnon. because he was upset that Trump has basically been repeating QAnon talking points. Joni Ernst did so yesterday, and not everybody wants to go down with that ship. And so it may be a race down there.
I think you're right. I think Lindsey Graham, I think that's a sign that Lindsey Graham is worried and he needed to do something. Yeah, his challenger, Jamie Harrison, just released fundraising. I've got it right here, just released fundraising information. And for the month of August, he outraised the incumbent Lindsey Graham by a fair amount. And in one of the polls there, I can't remember if it was from the Charleston paper or the Greenville paper, had the race essentially tied, even taking into account the margin of error. So I think the longer that race remains competitive like that, the more Democratic money you're going to see pouring into it, because I think that's a real chance there. And that would be more than significant for sure.
Be huge
if a Democrat won, not just in South Carolina, but against an incumbent like Lindsey Graham, who is nationally known.
And second in influence only to the Mitch McConnell,
yeah.
Who is also not completely safe up there in Kentucky.
Not completely safe. I'm not as excited about the fact that he might lose as I had been, because he somehow seems to be holding on, as he always does. But I think if I had to bet, I would bet more on Harrison beating Graham than McConnell losing.
Yeah. Now, but Cunningham in North.
Oh, go ahead.
Now, Cunningham in North Carolina, I have not seen a poll where he has less than a 5-point lead in like 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And McSally looks like she's going down. Right. And it looks like he could. What is his name? I'm having a hard time with names tonight. In Colorado, Hickenlooper is going to win. It looks like all the polls have him winning. Looks like Joni Ernst might be in a little bit of trouble, and her repeating QAnon theories probably isn't going to help at all.
Yeah, I think she's going in the wrong direction. I don't want to tell her what to do, but I think she's going down the wrong road there in Iowa. I think somebody on her staff, or maybe the senator herself, are kind of misreading the tea leaves in Iowa right now. I think that there would be a clear path for her if she would take a different tact there, and maybe somehow try to navigate a little bit against some of Trump's policies with regard to international trade that I think some of the voters in Iowa may be paying close attention to and are a little nervous about. But we'll see what happens there. The other thing is, let's not forget that we're now into September, and essentially voting is almost underway. There are places all over the country that are mailing out the ballots, and so a lot of votes are going to be cast between now and November 3rd, and so people are already making decisions now.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I want to take a little bit of break here. Every election, I've been asked to do this for, almost 30 years now. As a lawyer, I write analysis of the ballot propositions in California. And although I endorse it, I try to make it so that you learn enough about the ballot proposition where you can make up your own mind. I give them out. It usually gets published on Redheaded Black Belt and the rest. If anybody wants that or wants to contact me for any reason, they can reach me at ericvkirk@gmail.com. I'll give that out again at the end of the show. If you want my opinions on the ballot initiatives, there's about a dozen of them this time around. And so I usually, do that. And normally I wait till the end of September, but by then probably more than half of the votes could be in this time around because people do not want to take a chance on their ballots not being counted.
No kidding. Could I put in a plug for that? Because I've been on that list for a long time, and I can tell everybody that Eric does a terrific job of analyzing what's coming up on the ballot here in California, and it is worth reading before you cast your ballot. So I would encourage everyone to subscribe to that.
Thanks. With that, of course, the big thing is I think we didn't do a show after Trump gave his big, long,
Right.
boring speech. I mean, he gave it was 70 minutes, I think, compared to Biden, who did like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
It didn't break a record. I think Mondale broke the record in 1984, but it was long. But if it was his point it was just the usual stuff and not in any particularly coherent order. And I think that if his point was to do it so long that he could show that he was more vigorous and energetic than Biden, it fell flat because it was really low energy. I mean, they were playing clips of it, and he's just like, and the Democrats, want to, have defund your police, and it was like, it's like, wake up, dude. This is your moment, and and it was in front of a large crowd that should have cheered him on. I mean, they were all violating all the COVID rules, no mask packed. I think it was like between 1 and 2,000 of them on the White House lawn, and just in defiance of any protocols with regard to C-19. He knows who his base is. He'll talk that about these guidelines when he's talking on the national, but he obviously saw this. He's pretty much gone straight in on, I want my base to turn out in those key states. That's how he sees himself winning, is his base turning out in the Rust Belt and somehow trying to hold on to the Sun Belt and really just basically win what he won before.
Yeah.
There's very little offense. I think he made one trip to New Hampshire, but I don't think he's spending any ad money there. Um, and um, and I think they're spending a little bit in Minnesota, but I'm not all that convinced. There's a lot of saying that Minnesota is turning redder, and it is. There is there has been a turn, just like there has been in all of the Rust Belt, and we're talking about, of course, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, and of course Minnesota. I don't know if I left any out, but that's where he basically won last time around,
Yeah.
which used to be the blue wall, and it's not quite the blue wall anymore. But Biden is comfortably ahead in most of the in Michigan, so much that so far Trump has pulled his money out of there and focused everything on Wisconsin. He went to Wisconsin, and went and talked about all the money that he's going to be dropping in there to help police punish criminals and all that. And he got photo ops with some local police officers and the rest. Defended the 17-year-old who actually shot three protesters, killed two of them, and who's being charged with first-degree murder in that, and pretty much just is not moderating in any way, not appealing to any centrists or anything like that, but just feeling like he wants to get his base excited and turned out, and hopefully come within that 5% that he's behind in the popular vote, and still win, still eke out an electoral college win.
Yeah. Well, that trip to Kenosha, Wisconsin, interestingly enough, he did not meet with the family of Jacob Blake, the person who was killed.
Right.
He did, as you said, it was all about a photo op, and he was standing around a couple of places that had been burned, I think. But not to meet with a family, I think, is revealing in that his only plan for this campaign is to stoke the division and the violence, because that's all he has to run on. And oddly, he's trying to make it all Joe Biden's fault and the fault of Democratic mayors in large cities, when in fact, Trump is the one who's in office. This is happening on his watch, not Joe Biden's watch, on his watch. And I don't think that, well, certainly that's not going to sway anybody. I don't know that that's a good strategy even for bringing over some of the undecideds, the few that are left. So the party has no platform, so he can't run on ideas. He can't talk about the pandemic because there's been no coordinated federal response. All he has is to trot out grievance and hate and anger. And that's what he did in that awful 70-minute speech on the White House lawn,
Hmm.
which was illegal. All of the Trump Pence signs on the South Lawn of the White House, which is not supposed to be used for political purposes, yet he had a political convention on the lawn. And that 70-minute speech was low energy. He was just leaning on the podium there in a monotone drone, had no idea what he was reading. Teleprompter Trump is awful. And you're right, there was not much reaction from the crowd because there wasn't much to react to. And it was about as bad a political speech as I've ever seen. And I don't think that's overstating it.
Yeah, no, it was really bad. It was at least 20 minutes too long, if not a half hour.
Right.
I mean, it really should have been shorter. He wasn't, it was just, it was almost like he was giving out a laundry list of things to
Well,
say. As far as it being a violation of the Hatch Act, I mean, the whole RNC was, and there's actually an investigation as to whether or not the person who officiated the naturalization service, where he had the
yeah,
people of color, coming in, whether or not he violated the Hatch Act there, and all of a sudden the head of the DHS is like saying, "Oh, I didn't know he was going to do that." I mean, it's just they don't want, he doesn't want to go down with the ship. It's very interesting. The way that worked out. Apparently, he did, win over at least somewhat approval from a lot of black voters, because he had a lot of black people speaking at that convention, the most ever of any Republican convention ever. But that's not the kind of thing they're going to remember, and that's in an approval rating poll. Apparently, his approval rating went from 15 to 24%, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote for him, even
right.
if they're in that amount. But I think he's hoping that maybe in Michigan, if we can maybe get a few votes from Detroit and the black areas in that, in the Democratic strongholds there, and he's definitely, anyway, he's making a play for that, and but I think that's just geared towards specifically Wisconsin to maybe get a few votes in Milwaukee and in Michigan, and then there's the whole Kanye strategy,
Uh,
that is that they've got him on the ballot in a few states, some lawsuits about that, and so anyway, is that going to draw enough of the black votes away to allow him to win in Wisconsin and Michigan? I don't think so. I don't think very many people take Kanye that seriously, but
no, I don't think so. In fact, some of the things I've been reading on that and just my own, experience with some of that is that I'm predicting that Trump will not get more than 3% of the African American vote nationally. Now, he may do better in some states than others. And as we know, that's what's critical. It's where the votes are, not what the national numbers are. So,
yeah.
but I think nationally, it's just not going to work. There's just no way.
Yeah, there is an analysis of on YouTube. I'm forgetting the name of the young man who does it, but he did an analysis that if the current polling held in the various states, but there was a movement, as there was in away from the polling averages in 2016. A lot of people don't realize that the Sun Belt, including California, but also Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and we've talked about this before, Texas and New Mexico, she actually overperformed there. And I think that's because the older formulas for likely voters didn't excluded a lot of Latinos, but the same models for likely voters also failed to predict the Rust Belt, and Trump overperformed in all of the Rust Belt. But and so he did an analysis if the swing away from the poll average for that time was done with the polls as they are today, Biden still wins pretty handily.
Yeah.
Basically, Trump will win Ohio and Wisconsin, but
Mhm.
lose the rest of the Rust Belt. because the difference between the polling average and the final vote in those states just wasn't enough to overcome the current leads. And Hillary Clinton did not have these kind of leads after the Republican
Right.
convention last time around. She actually fell behind on the popular vote as well as a bunch of these things. Then moved up after the debates started, and then of course started to collapse again after the Comey letter. And so it really does look like, of course, that's the question: what's going to pop out? What's going to be the October surprise
Yeah.
for either side? And but looking at it right now, Biden is doing much better than Hillary Clinton did at this point in the race.
Right.
Still should be very cautious. Still time for Trump to turn it around, but time is starting to go against him. As of tomorrow, will be 2 months away, and that time passes pretty quickly.
It does, and let's not forget Trump won last time, so
Yeah.
we cannot take anything for granted. But one of the things I want to point out on some of the things you were just saying there is that we need to know exactly where the undecided voters are, because that makes a big difference. There aren't that many of them, depending upon which poll you look at nationally. Maybe as few as 5% are undecided, maybe as many as 8 to 9% are undecided, but it's somewhere in there. That's not a whole lot.
No.
However, it depends on where they are as to what to make of that number. If a lot of undecideds are in California, for example, then their decision may not make a whole lot of difference because Biden's going to win California. If some of the undecideds, or a big group of them, are in states like Oklahoma and Mississippi, their decision is probably not going to make a lot of difference because Trump's going to win those states. But if the undecideds are in some of those swing states that you've been mentioning, like Michigan and Ohio and Florida and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they could make a huge difference. So I'm hoping that the Biden campaign is looking at the undecideds through a couple of lenses. One, the fact that there aren't many undecideds left nationally means that Biden needs to keep pounding on the policy issues that he has been talking about and keeps reminding people that Trump hasn't done anything and has no vision for the future. But he also needs to know where those undecided voters are. There could be some things he could do specific to some of the swing states where the undecideds are that could make a difference policy wise. It just depends on where they are. So that's something to keep an eye on, is looking for numbers that actually pinpoint the undecideds and which states they're in.
Well, one of the things that they were saying is that he was possibly hurting him was that he had to, all of a sudden, because of the violence in the past week, address the issues of the police and all of that, and not go on the offensive on the pandemic. But he did go on the offensive today. He gave a talk, and the millibite is going to be that. Trump needs to get off Twitter and get to work. That's and I have a feeling they're going to be attacking him for his lack of policy, for his lack of ideas, that he improvises, and there is no coherent policy. Their policy is that, well, it's up to the states to take care of the pandemic, right? And that's not how you handle an international pandemic. It just can't be handled. There needs to be comprehensive policy. So Biden is doing that. He's supposed to go on tour. I think for his first trip will be to Wisconsin after Labor Day, and he's supposed to, and he's going to be conducting rallies consistent with the CDC guidelines, and that's going to be a point of his. And it's all good, but he will go into the towns. He will make a stop in Milwaukee. There was some criticism of him that he didn't do his acceptance speech in Milwaukee, so I think he's going to go there and try to make that up. But he's not going to Kenosha. He says that's just inflammatory, for that. But he will be in Wisconsin next week, and that sounds like he's really going to be focused on the Rust Belt. Now, I hope he doesn't do that at the expense of the Sun Belt, but because he's got some real chances down there. And what's interesting is that Ohio and Iowa, and possibly even Minnesota right now are trending to the right of Arizona in terms of the polls. And by some analysis, has Texas tilted towards Biden right now because of recent polls. So, he shouldn't exclude that. He's got to get down there too. But as we know, once we get to this part of the campaign, and because of the Electoral College, the campaign really comes down to a focus on maybe a dozen and really more like half a dozen states.
Well, one of the reasons I'm a little optimistic about some of those states that you just mentioned, and some of the ones you just mentioned are very expensive to mount a meaningful campaign in, like Ohio and Texas. You have large media markets in both of those states, just as examples. But one of the things that gives me a little bit of optimism is that it was either this morning or last night that the Biden campaign reported its August fundraising numbers. $364 million just in the month of August. And to put that in perspective, that's a record and is more than the Obama campaign had raised. And the Obama campaign was setting records for fundraising. What that means is that Biden is going to have enough money to be competitive in some of those large states because he'll be able to afford to buy in the large media markets in places like Ohio and Texas and make a run at those states. Without that kind of fundraising, he wouldn't be able to do that. Yeah. But it does show that there is a lot of energy and not just in people saying, I'll be glad to put up a yard sign. There's energy financially behind Biden. And I think that, who knows, that could make a difference. And if Biden could pick off just one of those states you mentioned, like Ohio or Texas, and maybe one more, and do okay in the Midwest, then he could win by a big enough margin that Trump would not be able to, mount a meaningful contested argument against it.
It seems to me if Biden does pull off a win in Texas, I think there are very few scenarios where he loses the election. That would be a huge turnaround. Trump would have to win pretty much the whole Rust Belt to overcome that, Pennsylvania and Michigan included.
He would certainly have to win Florida, and that's in question. Yeah. To offset Texas, he would have to have Florida and Ohio. So, because Biden is going to win some of the Midwestern states. So Trump will not be able to sweep the Rust Belt like he did last time. So a loss in Texas means that he has to be picking off states kind of all over the country.
Yeah, no, that would be huge. That's a lot of electoral college votes. I think second only after California, if I'm wrong. I don't know, maybe New York. I'm not sure. But anyway, why don't we talk a little bit about the contrasting styles of the campaigns? I mean, Trump has been in Wisconsin. He's making his way around. Biden has decided that he's not ready to go out on the road yet. He slipped into Pennsylvania for a quick rally on Monday, but he is going out after Labor Day. And I think his strategy has been, I'm going to play this low key. I'm going to let Trump hang himself, and I want to be the voice of stability, a return to normality. And, for instance, when the Republican commentators were all saying, Biden's just unentertaining, the Democratic talking people, doing the points out there, the people that are going and trying to create the narrative said, yeah, well, maybe we don't need entertaining anymore. Maybe it's time to take things seriously. And one of the things that Trump absolutely failed to do and probably could have really cut into Biden's lead if he didn't is he shows absolutely no humility. He didn't get up there and say, I know I can be kind of cantankerous. I know I don't speak the right language and, I've made some mistakes, but I want to learn from those mistakes. And, if he'd done anything like that, he could have cut into the center. But because he is emotionally incapable of that, he's got a problem. And Biden is going to play on that. Biden is going to be the one. I'm the one with emotional intelligence here. My opponent has none.
You know what? The Trump campaign is aware of exactly what you're saying there. And the indication of that happened during that last night of the Republican National Convention on the lawn of the People's House. And it was in the speech by his daughter, Ivanka, where she said toward the beginning of the speech, I know his Twitter account can seem a little unfiltered. I
Yes.
know he doesn't speak the same way as everybody else. I know he can sound a little aggressive. She went down a list of several things that everybody sees and a lot of voters don't like. But it was interesting that Trump himself did not do that, just as you're mentioning there. Trump himself is not capable of that. So his daughter made that attempt. And I think it fell, I don't think it made any difference because it didn't come from Trump himself.
Right. It's the other thing that was missing because you had 12 keynote speakers at the convention, half of them had the name Trump. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, as one meme went, that's just invokes images of North Korea, right? I mean, that's just, or an old feudal, dynasty. But the thing about it is here you had six children, six of his children talking, and not one of them spoke at all about their childhood, about any experiences they had of him as what a great father he was. None of them, not one
No.
experience that way. It was all about, oh, my dad's strong, blah, blah, blah. I mean, convince me you actually love the guy. Right? I came away unconvinced, except maybe with the one you said she was soft, but but the rest of them, no, and that is, that is something that people notice. If you're not in that base of people that are just mobilized because he's the champions their whatever it is they consider to be their causes, and was completely absent there. Everybody did that. Even Bush's kids did that.
Yeah.
Nobody does that. And it's just like, do they have any happy childhood memories? And maybe their line will be, well, that's not important to Americans, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares about what a good father he was. Well, that's not true.
You do
That
care
is,
that side of a person, and I think you're right. I think what that shows is that in the Trump family, the relationships in the family are exactly the way Trump's relationships in business and politics are, and that is they're transactional. The children are saying what they're saying because they have something to gain by getting dad reelected.
yeah,
So it wasn't, they weren't there to talk about what a great person he is or how empathetic he is or what a great dad he was. That wasn't on their mind at all, not even close, not even a line in the speeches. I agree with you. And I think based on how people are feeling at this point after nearly 4 years of Donald Trump, what you're saying would have been important for them to talk about, but they did not do that,
yeah,
interestingly enough. And it also shows that all Trump is selling is anger, grievance, and hate. That's what he's selling. And his base is going to buy it, but nobody else will. So the whole thing is going to come down to exactly how it came down in 2016. It's where the votes are. That's what it's going to come down to. Nothing has changed. Trump is the same person. And for all those people who voted for him in 2016 saying, well, I'd like to try something different. And yeah, he's a little rough around the edges, but he'll grow into the job. Well, guess what? He did not, because that's not who he is. He's Donald Trump, the same Donald Trump he's been since the 70s and 80s. And, one scandal after another. And there are even more that are in the pipeline, scandals and investigations that we haven't even talked about tonight, that are going to come to the fore. So there is no softer side of Donald Trump for anybody to talk about. He's an angry, grievance peddling hate monger who is trying to get reelected.
yeah.
That's
And you would think that Joe Biden was the president, and he's the insurgent coming to change it
Trump is
all.
trying to. You're right. Trump, to follow on to that, Trump is trying to blame Joe Biden for some of the violence in the streets when this is happening on Trump's watch. It's not Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden's not the one who is the incumbent. All of this, the burning that we see is happening on Trump's watch, not Joe Biden's watch. And, that's for people who pay any attention at all, that's going to be obvious. But it is meant to hold his base together because he knows he cannot win if he loses any of his base at all. He has no margin of error with regard to his base of support. So he's trying to mobilize the base and convince them that he's the same Donald Trump that they voted for in 2016. And that's their calculation, that he can win in 2020 in the same way that he won in 2016. And I think that's a miscalculation, but it's all they have because they have no policy to run on.
Yeah, I agree. They don't even have a platform. I mean,
No.
for the first time in how many decades, they just didn't even bother with a platform.
No.
And when he was asked by a reporter, or not him, but one of the spokespeople was asked by a reporter, well, what does he have in mind for the second term? They just didn't really have an answer. They just said, well, he'll deal with it as it comes. No vision. There's no vision here. Make America great again, but that's about it. And the other thing I noticed, though, that they are, I think, picking up on the Republicans is in that 70-minute speech, I don't recall hearing Sleepy Joe once. I heard other names.
Right.
I may be wrong, and maybe he said it at some point, but I think that doesn't work well in this campaign because Sleepy Joe implies calm. And that's what people want in leadership, a lot of them right now. Somebody who can calm the country, calm the divisions. And, people are saying this is the most divided they've seen the country since 1968. And possibly even before that. I mean, there really is a division. I mean, people are really getting on to online, and you can blame it on the internet, but the internet's been around for 26 years now, and but it's really bad now. You go into the things that people are just calling each other liars, people that they don't know, and doxing people and attacking them in real life. I mean, and I'm not saying it's all Trump supporters doing it. There's plenty of people doing it around, but the point is it's the climate we're in, yeah. and the president does have an impact on that. The language they choose to use, yep. Not just even policies, just how they talk to America, and yeah. So I don't think you're going to hear. Yeah. I don't think you're going to hear Sleepy Joe. Maybe Sloppy Joe you'll hear, but I don't think you're going to hear that. And what the Trump supporters are banking on right now is that Biden is truly suffering from dementia, and it'll become obvious in the debates. Well, Bernie supporters were hoping for that in that last debate. He held together fine, and I think they're making the mistake there too because they're making expectations so low that all Joe has to do is not show dementia, and he's aced it.
Yeah. The debates are going to be big, and so was the vice presidential debate. I think simply, and I actually think the vice presidential debate is going to mean more this time than it has at least in my memory, because of the age of the two at the top of the tickets. And because of the health concerns. I mean, there are obviously health concerns about Donald Trump, just as there are with Joe Biden.
Well, that story just broke about the strokes.
Yeah, Walter Reed. Yeah. So, so we'll see. And I think the vice presidential debate is going to be no contest. So if the vice presidential debate means anything in this election cycle, then that's a plus for the Democrats. And I think everybody is a little nervous about the debates. Nobody knows how they're going to go. But I think Biden has shown recently, especially, that he'll be okay. He'll be fine. He's not going to I don't know that he's going to bring any significant new voters, but I think getting through the debates is going to be important. I think Trump is going to hurl all kinds of mostly just insults at people during the debates, including Biden, and include. I think Trump is going to be debating against Obama as well in the debates. I think you'll hear him reference President Obama in the debates because that's all he has. Again, he can't run on his record because there really is no record of governing. And I want to go back. You mentioned the platform, the fact that there is no platform, which I think is significant because it shows that we can expect this campaign to continue just as it is, at least from the Republican side, in that Donald Trump, without releasing any policy ideas, has no intention of making a case that he will be good governing in a second term because he's not interested in that. And the fact that the Republican Party went along with that and did not generate any kind of policy foundation for a platform to be built upon means that they're going along with it. They're fine with no nod toward governance at all. It shows that all they're about is packing the judiciary. That's it. Just putting conservative judges, many of them unqualified, onto the federal bench. That's all they're about. They're not interested in governing at all. If they were, there would be a platform with policy ideas, with something aspirational for the next 4 years. But there is nothing like that. Zero.
I think he's also making a mistake taking on the mayors because the mayor of Portland just gave an incredible speech on Monday about the divisiveness, about the and really just went through a litany of how Trump has made it worse for the cities right now and the rest. And okay, you can blame the Democratic mayors, but when you have the Proud Boys and the Prayer Group going in with 600 vehicles in Portland, it's just to basically taunt left-wingers or taunt everybody in Portland. I mean, and it looks like a kind of a crazy person shot the one guy, and it's horrible, but it was asking for it. And how do you blame a Democratic mayor on that for a literal invasion? And he responded, but he didn't even blame them. He responded, and I urge people to Google Portland mayor speech and listen to it. It's really phenomenal. And each mayor it then becomes a person who can respond to that. Especially if he attacks them by name, as Trump did. The other thing I'm really noticing here is I only saw a few senators at the RNC. You had McConnell, you had Joni Ernst, but where was McSally? Where was some of the other people that are running? They don't want to be associated with them. I don't think he's going to share the stage with a whole lot of senators or a whole lot of local people who are running in close elections. Biden is going to have a stage full of people, and he's going to have Obama going out and plugging for him and attacking. Apparently, he's taken upon himself to do a lot of attacking of Trump, which is unusual. So it's going to look like it's all Trump versus the Biden having a lot of allies. I may be wrong. Maybe there'll be a bunch of people that'll show up and be on Trump's stage, but they had a lot of quote unquote ordinary people at the RNC. But I think 3 senators was the total. I don't think Lindsey Graham spoke. So it's just anyway. We're getting down to predictions. Chuck, do you have any predictions?
I have 2 real quick ones here. One, just in reading over the last few days. I predict that Florida is going to be a problem again, just as it was, or similar to the way it was in the year 2000, which was a disaster. But what's going on in Florida right now is that they're having problems with their scanning machines that scan, especially the ballots that in-person voting has to do with. So it could be that Florida is again a problem, and who knows what will happen there. Second prediction, Joe Kennedy III, we talked about him at the beginning of the show in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate and lost to the incumbent Ed Markey. I don't think that this is the end of Joe Kennedy III. I think he will reemerge at some point, maybe even as an ambassador in the Biden campaign. maybe in some nonprofit that he starts in the state of Massachusetts to take on policy issues, which is something that Kennedys have done before. Maybe he'll run for office again. I don't know, but I don't think we've seen the last of Joe Kennedy III.
All right. I actually kind of blew it and gave my prediction because I predicted that Trump's campaign is going to be not involve a whole lot of elected officials. I think Biden will be sharing the stage with social distance with a lot of them. I think people are going to want to be associated with him. I think the Democrats, even if they're in close races, are going to want him to win the election. And so I expect that there will be that. I think there are a lot of Republicans that are running from Trump right now. And I think that's going to become pronounced, and it will be done. I'm also predicting, because there isn't a huge difference in the pre-convention polling than there was. The RCP Real Clear Politics average is still about 7.5 or something like that, with Biden having in terms of the national average. But we're going to have to really focus on the polling in the individual states, because that's where it's really going to matter. And I'm predicting that there won't be a big change. I think that that Biden will win the popular vote, probably by as much as 5%, and but it may be as low. I think he has to win it by at least 3 to guarantee and maybe that doesn't even guarantee an electoral college win. But I believe he's going to win by the popular vote, and I cannot predict whether that's going to be the outcome of the election. So with that, we're out of time. I want to invite people to watch. Of course, if you're watching this, you're watching it on Access Humboldt Channel 12, which I believe is aired on 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. Or you're listening to me on KZZH, which is now being moved. I apologize. On Wednesday, the television show if you're watching, is at 7:30. But you know that if you're watching me. A KCZH radio show will be 7 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that is a change of our times. And like I said, if you want us to talk about anything in particular, you've got any input whatsoever, if you want my commentary on the ballot propositions, which I am going to be working on over Labor Day, because I know everybody wants them early, you can reach me at ericvkirk@gmail.com. Make sure you get that V in there. My middle name is Vang, because if a lot of people get my mail, or a lot of people send it to Eric Kirk at Gmail, and it's this kind of conservative guy back east who's annoyed about getting all my political mail. So make sure you get that V in there, ericvkirk@gmail. Anyways, Chuck, thanks a lot for doing this, and we'll see you again next time. We'll see you again on Redwood Wonk.